get the microphone on?
I'm about to turn it on right now.
Okay, thank you.
I tried to kill a judge today. Those were the defendant's words mere hours after he violently attacked Judge Mary Kay Holthus in this courthouse on January 3rd of 2024 in courtroom 3F.
In accordance with the laws and standards.
Is she okay? Hey, can you fucking radio somebody? Fucking radio somebody!
We're all here today because of that attack. Judge Mary Kay Holthus is here today because of the bravery and intervention of 6 men. Her law clerk, Michael Lasso, Correctional Officer Joseph Cabralda, Chief Deputy District Attorney Jory Scarborough, Chief Deputy District Attorney Richard Scow, Marshal Shane Brandon, the court marshal in Department 18 where this event occurred, and Marshal Ben Bachhuber, who is the court marshal in the courtroom next door. On the date of this incident, Judge Mary Kay Holthus was 62 years of age. She had been a judge since 2019. She had a mixed caseload, which meant she heard both civil matters and criminal matters. January 3rd of 2024 was a Wednesday, which meant it was a criminal calendar day. In anticipation of her calendar, she went through her calendar before the calendar actually occurred. Mr. Redden's case was obviously on calendar that day. She reviewed the relevant information pertinent to Mr. Redden's matter, which was on calendar for a motion to quash bench warrant and rendition of sentence, meaning he was supposed to be sentenced in front of her. The information she reviewed consisted of his pre-sentence investigation report. That report provides her important background information about Mr. Redden, but also the facts of the underlying offense. She made some preliminary notes. There was nothing particularly unique about Mr. Redden's case. Then her criminal calendar occurs. When Mr. Redden's case gets called, it's approximately 11:10 in the morning. A little more than halfway through her calendar, which began at 9:30 a.m. When the case gets called, initially, everything is going normal. You'll hear that typically with criminal sentencing, the state gets to argue first. Then a defendant is free to make a statement if he wishes to. In this case, Mr. Redden did. He argued for probation. He presented the court with information that he believed mitigated against a term of incarceration. After Mr. Redden was done, his defense attorney, Cesar Almasi, also made an argument to the court, seeking probation on his behalf. After Mr. Almasi was done, but prior to Judge Mary Kay Holthus having the opportunity to impose the sentence that she believed was appropriate, she made a comment, and that comment was interpreted by many people in the courtroom, including Mr. Redden, as indicating that he was not going to receive probation. After that comment was made, and before she imposed the sentence, Mr. Redden jumped over defense counsel's table, which was approximately 2.5 feet tall and 3 feet deep. He then bolted towards Judge Mary Kay Holthus's judicial bench. As you can see from this picture, the courtroom is set up differently from how this courtroom is set up. There's only one entrance and exit to the judicial bench in that courtroom. He then launched himself 4 feet, more than 4 feet, in the air and tackled Judge Mary Kay Holthus like she was a football player. He then, once was over the bench and made contact with her, pulled her by the hair as hard as he could and yanked her to the ground like she was a rag doll. When she testifies, you'll hear that she remembers being struck in the head, but she doesn't remember how it happened. She doesn't remember if it was an intentional act by the defendant, whether her head hit something, an object nearby during this altercation. But she remembers being jolted and frightened. She was trapped. This is the judicial bench in that courtroom. That entrance is the only entrance to or from where she sits when she presides over her calendar. And the altercation that you saw in the first clip happened right there. She had nowhere to go. She was terrified. She knew that she was no match for his physical strength. So she hid. She hid as far away from Mr. Redden as she possibly could. She crawled into the corner of that bench and waited there until the entire thing was over. When you watch the full video, you'll see that it took approximately 3 to 4 minutes before Mr. Redden was moved from that location. She was so shaken up, you'll hear that initially she tried to climb that wall that you see in the picture and exit her courtroom where her court clerk sits. That's not an exit. But she did not want to be near Mr. Redden, and Mr. Redden was still in the entrance when he was eventually apprehended. Michael Lasso was the first person to intervene on her behalf because he was situated closest. Michael Lasso is her law clerk. He's been her law clerk for several months now. He'll tell you about what his job duties are as a law clerk. But more than a law clerk, he is also a close family friend of the Holthuses. He has known Judge Mary Kay Holthus his entire life. He was not supposed to be at work that day. Fortunately, he changed his mind and decided to go in. He will tell you that among his many job duties as his law clerk, or as her law clerk, is he sits next to her during the calendars in case something comes up that she needs help with. Thankfully, on this day, he was situated exactly where he needed to be, to her left in that courtroom, as she presided over criminal matters. He was answering emails, performing work, and also paying attention to what was occurring on the calendar. He first realized that something was amiss when Judge Holthus made a comment and her marshal moved closer to Mr. Redden. You will hear that when her court marshal moves closer to a defendant who appears out of custody for sentencing, that generally means that defendant is about to be remanded into custody. When the marshal moved closer to Mr. Redden and started to unclasp his handcuffs, they jingled. And then he remembers seeing Mr. Redden bolt over defense counsel's table and across the courtroom. Initially, he believed that perhaps Mr. Redden was trying to exit out of one of these rear exits in the courtroom that staff use. But it became apparent to him pretty quickly that his intended target was Judge Mary Kay Holthus. And when you watch the video, you'll see the surprise, the shock in his eyes as he's watching this occur. He remembers Mr. Redden launching himself directly at Judge Holthus and knocking her out of her chair with such force that her head hit the tile wall behind the bench. He immediately knew that he needed to take action because he was frightened for her life and he was frightened for his own life. So he lifts Mr. Redden off of Mary Kay Holthus because he's the closest person to her. He got some assistance along the way, and the first person to come to his aid, and Judge Holthus's aid, was Correctional Officer Joseph Caralda. You will hear that on this date, he was assigned to the Field Services Unit at the Clark County Detention Center. That means that he's one of the correctional officers that's responsible for transporting inmates to and from their court hearings. He's also responsible for documenting the outcome of those hearings. So he was seated in the witness stand in that courtroom, which is directly next to the judge, but there's no doorway between the witness stand and the judge's bench. So when he saw the defendant go for Judge Mary Kay Holthus and tackle her, he had to climb over that wall to get to the point where he could assist. When you watch the video where the yellow circle is, that's Officer Caralda climbing over the wall. At this time, Officer Caralda was the only correctional officer remaining in the courtroom because other correctional officers had just done what they call a download, which means moving defendants who were already done with their cases back to the detention center. You will hear that he struggled mightily trying to get control over Mr. Redden. That Mr. Redden resisted both he and Mr. Lasso and everyone else that came to their aid very hard. At some point, Mr. Redden was able to knock him to the ground. At which point, Mr. Lasso and Mr. Scarborough began to work even harder to get him off of Officer Caralda, because Officer Caralda was armed back, which could have presented a whole new set of problems. Mr. Redden continued to resist, which is why you see Officer Caralda and Officer Lasso striking him over and over again, because they needed to get him to comply, and he was not getting it. He was still struggling to get away from them, struggling to get back to Judge Holthus. Eventually, they do get him under control, and Officer Caralda actually uses one of Marshal Shane Brandon's, his actual set of handcuffs. He gets one cuff on Mr. Redden, but Mr. Redden is still resisting, so it takes an additional marshal before they can actually get him into both arms into the cuffs. Chief Deputy District Attorney Jory Scarborough was in the courtroom that day because he had another matter that was on calendar, not Mr. Redden's case. He's assigned to a specialty unit at the Clark County DA's office, the gun crimes unit. And you'll hear that as a specialty team deputy, he makes multiple court appearances in a day, oftentimes. So he arrived at Judge Holthus's department at around 10 a.m., and he was still present, waiting for his case to be called when this broke out. Again, he was partially paying attention, partially not, but he got the gist that Mr. Redden's case was on for sentencing. The state wanted prison time. Mr. Redden wanted probation. And then he figured out that Judge Holthus was not going to give him probation. He remembers, like Mr. Lasso, watching Marshal Shane Brandon move closer to the defendant. He looks down to do something else. And when he looks up, he sees that the defendant has already cleared defense counsel's table and is running full speed and hurling himself at Judge Mary Kay Holthus. Like Mr. Lasso and Officer Cabralda, he immediately knew that he needed to assist. So he went around the witness stand, climbed over the same wall that Officer Cabralda climbed over, and tried to wrap his elbow around Mr. Redden's neck to gain compliance. It obviously didn't work initially. He'll tell you that Mr. Redden was elbowing him repeatedly and trying to buck him off so that he could get back to Judge Holthus. But with the assistance of Chief Deputy Richard Scow and the other people who I've already mentioned, they were ultimately able to get him to comply. You will hear from both Michael Lasso and Jory Scarborough that once Mr. Redden was under control, their first thought was to check on Judge Holthus. When they checked on her, they saw her still curled up in the fetal position underneath her bench. And she looked terrified. She was frightened, disoriented, shaken. And that really struck Mr. Lasso because he's known Ms. Holthus his whole life. And he's always thought of her as a tough cookie. But in that moment, she was scared. Marshal Shane Brandon, as I mentioned earlier, is assigned to Department 18. He's been assigned to that department for approximately 2 years. As the court marshal, he is responsible for maintaining order and safety in the courtroom during calendars. Because of a previous incident that he had where an out-of-custody defendant tried to flee from the courtroom, it became his practice to stand exactly there. The doors behind him that you see in this photograph are the public entrance and exit doors. So he stands there to prevent defendants from fleeing the courtroom if they don't like the outcome. Like Mr. Lasso and Mr. Scarborough, he realized that Judge Holthus was not going to give Mr. Redden probation. So he made his way directly behind Mr. Redden, at which point he intended to handcuff him to remand him into custody. He unclasped his handcuffs, and immediately Mr. Redden bolted across defense counsel table. When you watch the video, you'll see that Mr. Redden hops the table, but Court Marshal Shane Brandon walked around this device that was kind of blocking his path to Judge Holthus. It's called an Elmo. And in his pursuit of Mr. Redden, just as he was about to grab his legs, as he was lunging over the bench, he tripped or somehow fell. And when he fell, he sustained a huge gash to his forehead that required 25 stitches. In addition to that gash, he severely injured his shoulder. He didn't initially notice that his shoulder was injured until he stood up in front of Judge Holthus's bench and tried to propel himself over the bench using his arm. At that point, he realized there was something severely wrong with his arm. He had to have shoulder surgery and was placed on light duty until just a few weeks ago, when he returned to full duty. He doesn't remember a whole lot of the incident, not surprising, but when he stood up and realized what was transpiring, even after he couldn't get over the bench because of his injured arm, he walked around the desk where court staff sits to assist as best he could, given the circumstances. He passed his handcuffs off to Officer Cabralda and helped try to restrain Mr. Redden. Eventually, court staff in Department 18 alerted the marshal next door to the emergent situation that was occurring in Department 18. He is the court marshal assigned to courtroom 3E, which is directly to the left of Department 3F, which is where Judge Holthus's courtroom is. Court staff walked into the courtroom. They were in session, just like Judge Holthus, and said, "We need you now. It's an emergency. please come now. So he walked out one of the rear exits to the courtroom like that, and then walked into the rear exit of the courtroom where these events were unfolding. When he walked in, his entrance into the judge's bench area was blocked because her chair, the law clerk's chair, had all kind of piled up right there. He moved them, and when he got to Mr. Redden had one handcuff in the cuffs and one still loose. He was still resisting very hard, and they were struggling to get the cuffs on him. So he took control of the loose arm so that the other individuals could get him in handcuffs. Once the defendant, Mr. Redden, finally calmed down to the point where they felt comfortable relocating him, he was taken to the holding cell just to the side of where the court staff sits. And once he was in the holding cell, Marshal Bachhuber and the other marshals that were down there at this point did what they needed to do to document what had occurred in the courtroom.
Oh, it's somebody on blue jeans, can you mute them? Stop. Oh, God, what? What?
Somebody put some inappropriate, video on there. It was inappropriate.
Okay, we may not be doing blue jeans or Zoom during the hearing, if that's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry, counsel,
It's okay.
and I'm sorry. This has never happened. At least not while I've been on the bench.
It was the first time for everything. Anyways, going back to where I was, Mr. Redden sat in the holding cell outside of the courtroom for approximately an hour or so before Marshal Bachhuber, Marshal Rollinson, and their lieutenant escorted him to the Clark County Detention Center. You'll hear that it's the court marshal's responsibility to book an out-of-custody inmate who was remanded into custody, which is why they had to do it. So they walked him over to the Clark County Detention Center where he began the booking process. You will hear from Correctional Officer Darren Meegum and Correctional Officer Elmis Cabrera that during the booking process, an inmate sees both psych and classification. And that's done for the purposes of determining where to house these individuals. When Mr. Redden was seen by psych on January 3rd of 2024, he reported homicidal ideations. Specifically, the report indicates, in regards to homicidal ideation, patient stated, "Only the judge. She sentenced me to prison." He denied having a plan to harm her. He also denied thoughts or intent to harm officers or other patients, or anyone other than the judge who sent him to prison. Ultimately, because of his expression of homicidal ideations, they determined it would be best to house him in Unit 2C. You will hear that Unit 2C is the unit where they send people with homicidal ideations, among other things. But with regards to his classification in 2C, it was because of his statements. So Officers Darren Meekum and Elmis Cabrera went to transfer release, where the defendant had been waiting for classification. They were tasked with the responsibility of getting him dressed out into his Clark County Detention Center uniform, as well as performing what they refer to as a strip search. You'll see the video of them in the area, but there's no audio. Officer Darren Meacham is the taller individual standing at the front. Officer Cabrera is the individual off to his left. And when they walked into the cell, it was a single person cell. He was by himself. They observed him casually laying on the bench with his hands behind his head. They gave him commands, told him what they were there for, and he spontaneously stated to them, "Sorry I'm moving so slow. I'm kind of sore today. I tried to kill a judge." Those statements that Mr. Redden made and that violent attack against 62-year-old Judge Mary Kay Holtis are the reason that we're all here today. And when the state is done presenting its evidence, we are going to ask that you return a verdict of guilty as to the only charge in this case. Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Arnold.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Do you want me to get back on Zoom or no? Not right now. I want to make sure his presentation's unobstructed.
Okay. We're good. Sir?
May it please the court, counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, thank you for your time and attention. 3.7 seconds. 3.7 seconds. That was when the officer unclaps the handcuffs. My client heard it, turned and looked at him, and made a move for the bench. This all occurred in 3.7 seconds. .7 seconds, that was not enough time for Mr. Redden to formulate the intent to kill Judge Holtis. Remember what this case is about. There is one count of attempted murder. And for there to be an attempted murder, there has to be intent to kill. As everything else in life, the story didn't begin on January 13th. This story actually occurred on April 13th, 2023. This is when Mr. Redden was first arrested for what brought him in front of Judge Holtis. And basically, Mr. Redden was arrested for swinging a metal baseball bat at his brother-in-law. What was he charged with? He was charged with assault with a deadly weapon. He was also apprehended by the police, and he was taken into custody. When you're taken into custody, you're supposed to, within 48 hours, stand before a magistrate so they could decide the question of bail or not. Mr. Redden, on April 13th, told the officers that had him in custody that he refused to be transported. So he was just going to stay in custody without these charges being read to him. The following week, they waited some time, continued the matter. On April 20th, 2023, Mr. Redden, he failed to leave his jail cell again, and he says that he wasn't coming to the hearing. They had to continue the hearing. Again, on April 25th, Mr. Redden refused to be transported to the heading. Finally, the Justice Court Judge Jacinto, he did an order that says, by any means necessary, he needs to be present in this courtroom. So on April 26th, the officers got Mr. Redden, and he was present. The judge then, he's handed the charges. The judge asked him if he understood the charges. Mr. Redden didn't even respond to the judge's questions, even though he had a copy of the information, which was assault with a deadly weapon, on his person. And not only did he not answer the judge's questions, he became disruptive in the court proceedings. At this point, again, we have almost a week plus that we see this individual not coming to court. Once he gets to court, he's being disruptive and he's not participating in the court proceedings. At this point, his attorney, which was a public defender, then petitions the court to send him to what's called competency court. Competency court is a whole nother courtroom here in our building. And competency court is for people that do not understand the legal proceedings, are unable to assist their attorneys in their defense, or number 3, appear to have some kind of mental condition that prohibits them from acting properly in court. All those things were exhibited by my client, Mr. Redden. He was sent there to be evaluated and see if he can be restored to competency. Restored to competency is basically, we can't try you. We cannot prosecute you under the law since you're not understanding what's going on. You're not displaying courtroom behavior, you're not helping your attorney out. We can't sit here and prosecute you. Go ahead. So, basically, he's found on May 23rd, he's sent to Lake Crossing. Lake Crossing is a mental institution here in town, and what they do at Lake Crossing is make sure that you're evaluated to test your competency. Sometimes, people are sent there and they have little lingering symptoms like they're just making up, acting crazy. Other times, they sit there and evaluate someone and their mental instability is so severe, they just have to stay at Lakes Crossing for an indefinite amount of time because, again, the state can't prosecute you under that incompetency. So, in regards to Mr. Redden, he was evaluated and it was determined by Dr. John Paglini, who will be here and he'll testify in regards to this case and in regards to his finding of incompetency. And there are other psychiatrists because there at least has to be 2 that make that determination. And what they determined was he was incompetent to stand trial, and so he was given a course of medication because his evaluation indicated that during this course of medication that would calm him down, bring him back to earth, bring him to a person that we can work with, that he can go to court, he can understand the proceedings, and not be disruptive in court. So Mr. Redden, when you go back to that one, I just want to make the last point that he was at Lakes Crossing for 5 months. He was eventually found by the doctors on October 20th, 2023 to be competent to go ahead and proceed with trial. So exactly 5 months later. Go ahead now, sir. After he returned back to Justice Court, he was in front of Judge Jacinto. He had discussions with his attorney at that time, and they decided that he was going to go ahead and enter into a guilty plea with the state of Nevada. Again, now he's of right mind. He is able to discuss his case with his attorney. As you can see, there was no courtroom outbursts or anything like that. And so much so, the judge released him on November 1st, 2023. He was released from custody. Okay? He returns to back to court, and now this is district court. This is in front of Judge Holtis. And on December 6th, he has no extreme courtroom behavior. He goes ahead and the guilty plea agreement's read to him, he answers a myriad of questions, and he pleads guilty to an attempt assault with a deadly weapon. The sentencing was scheduled for January 3rd, 2024. Next slide. What you're going to see through medical records, through the testimony of Dr. Paglini, Mr. Redden did not receive his medication that he had while he was here in Clark County Detention Center. What happened was he gets released and he's given a prescription. That prescription is supposed to be filled at the Mojave Health Center. He calls and you'll hear testimony from Karen Springer. Karen Springer is his foster mother that he stayed with during this time. They made several attempts at appointments, called, and attempted to get him in so he could take his medication. However, you'll see through the testimony, he does not get medication, and he doesn't get it for 2 months. So from November 1st to 2020, in November 1st, 2023 to January 3rd, 2024, a period of 60 days, he does not have his medication that put him in that state where we saw the appropriate behavior. What you're seeing today, basically, he's under that medication that he had when he was in CCDC. And that's why he's displaying, good decorum, appropriate courtroom behavior. He's not going to wild out, and trust me, I'll tackle him if he tries to, do anything like that. But bottom line, that's not going to happen because he's medicated, he's calm, he understands what the proceedings are and what's going on right now. During this 60 days, Mr. Redden slipped back into his unstable mental state. The same mental state that he had when he was first arrested for assault with a deadly weapon and charged and eventually pled to attempted assault with a deadly weapon. Next. Then we have this unfortunate incident that happened on January 3rd, 2024. One thing I noticed, and I looked at this videotape several times from the very beginning to the very end. I know that all the parties involved. A simple question wasn't asked. And I'll explain later as to why it wasn't asked. But no one asked Mr. Redden, did you take your medication today? His attorney didn't ask, the prosecution didn't ask, nor Judge Holtis asked. I'm not saying this is anybody's fault, it simply wasn't done. So he comes into court and nobody knows what his real mental state is during that time. Nobody knows that for 60 days he's been having paranoid thoughts. Nobody knows that he's been staying at home, not going out into the public, and different other things that were discovered by Dr. Paglini that he'll discuss. Mr. Redden did not intend to kill Judge Holtis. The evidence will show that Judge Holtis, she hurt her head when she struck the wall that was directly behind her, similar to this wall. She also was hurt when she fell on the floor. You'll see pictures. She wasn't significantly bruised. She was bruised, but it wasn't significant bruises. And those were basically on the areas where she fell. She had no cut. She had no strangulation marks on her throat. There will be no evidence that anybody ever that saw Mr. Redden touch her throat. We'll have specific evidence of where his hands were placed right before he was pulled off of Judge Holtis. But again, his actions do not indicate that he was intending to kill Judge Holtis. And again, you always have to go back to intent. That is going to be the big question that you guys are going to have to deal with at closing. Did he have the intent to go ahead and kill? And we are gonna submit that the evidence does not show there was any intent to kill Judge Holtis. Thank you.